All good?
Yeah. All good.
Fantastic. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Chancellor, for taking the time to sit down again with us this year.
Yes.
Second year in a row.
And this time as Chancellor.
And
Last
this
year
time
I
as
was
Chancellor.
Shadow Chancellor.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, thanks for coming back to our conference.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting us. So I'm Ben from TLDR News, and we make videos about news and current affairs to our sort of generally younger audience. So I just wanted to start by revisiting some of the questions that we asked you last year before moving on to some sort of more policy-focused questions, and especially with a focus on the next 5 years in government. So as you mentioned, last time we spoke to you, you were the Shadow Chancellor, and obviously an election's happened since then. You now reside in number 11. And you have one of your main responsibilities is guiding the country through one of the most difficult financial situations in its history. So one of the first questions I asked you last year was what you wanted to achieve in your first 100 days in office. Today marks the 80th day in office. So what do you think you've achieved so far, and how's it going?
Well, it's great to be back with you. And when we were in the election campaign, I said that growth was the #1 mission of this government, because through growing our economy, we can create more good jobs, paying decent wages in all parts of the country. And also through growth, we'll have the money to invest in our public services, particularly our schools and our National Health Service. And so I've tried in those first 80 days to pursue policies that help businesses, big and small, invest in our economy to create that wealth and prosperity. So a few examples. We've reformed the planning system to make it easier for building to happen, particularly housing. We've committed to build 1.5 million homes during the course of this Parliament to help families and young people get on the housing ladder, but also reform to make it easier to build research labs, data centres, energy projects. The last government effectively banned onshore wind as the cheapest form of energy at a time when energy bills are still very high. And so we ended that ban, so we can now build that cheap energy here in the UK. In addition to that, we've created a national wealth fund to invest alongside business in homegrown British industries, in low carbon and clean power, to bring good jobs and to get down bills and to boost our energy security as a country. Those are just some of the things that we've been pursuing to try and grow our economy to lift living standards.
So just on the National Wealth Fund, so originally before the election, it was announced that you'd be investing £28 billion annually in a green investment fund. So that was scrapped, and you've promised £7.3 billion across the Parliament in the National Wealth Fund. That's roughly equivalent to what the European Investment Bank invested prior to Brexit in the UK. Do you think £7.3 billion is enough to stimulate the amount of growth that you're hoping to achieve?
£7.3 billion is for the National Wealth Fund. For every pound that the public purse puts into the National Wealth Fund, we're looking to unlock £3 of private investment. So on top of that 7.3, 22 billion pounds of private investment. But in addition to that, we've created GB Energy, a wholly publicly owned energy company endowed with just over £8 billion of public money to invest in low carbon energy generation. And that will be headquartered in Scotland, and that will help that transition to net zero, to get clean power by 2030. And again, it's about bringing good jobs, paying decent wages to communities across our country, particularly in former industrial communities and coastal communities where we really need the creation of good jobs, wealth and prosperity.
So a lot of people listening to that will assume that sounds quite positive, but I think a lot of people will also look at that and think that the budget is coming up. This has been a thing that's been in the news quite a lot recently, and they'll be apprehensive about that and apprehensive about the future. Do you think there's a way of stimulating growth and closing this fiscal black hole, this £22 billion fiscal black hole, without significant cuts to public services?
I said at conference today, there's not going to be a return to austerity under this Labour government. Austerity under the Conservatives was deeply damaging for our public services, particularly schools and our health service. But it also choked off the growth and investment that is needed to lift living standards. So it was counterproductive. So we won't be going back to that. But you're right that there is this big black hole in the public finances left to us, covered up by the previous government, that we now need to address. And so there's going to be some difficult decisions around tax and spending and welfare at the budget. We've already had to make some of those difficult decisions. They weren't decisions that I wanted to make. They were not decisions that I was expecting to make. but we need to get a grip of the public finances. Today is the 2-year anniversary of the Liz Truss mini budget, and we know the damage that that did. When governments lose control of the public finances, it is ordinary working people that pay the price. Higher mortgages, higher rents, higher prices in the shops. I am not going to take those risks with the economy. People have put their trust in me. I'm going to repay that trust by making sure we've got a grip on the public finances, but by bringing that stability back to our economy and having that grip that the Conservatives just didn't have, we can return growth to our economy and bring those good jobs paying decent wages. That's the prize for stability and also the reform, including the National Wealth Fund and the GB Energy.
So in that response, you've said, and in your speech today, there'd be no return to austerity, but you've also ruled out an increase in national insurance, in income tax, in VAT. With the background of the black hole and with you ruling out a return to austerity, will you be able to stick to that commitment?
Yes, and I think it is really important that politicians stick to what they promise at an election, because trust in politics is at an all-time low. And a lot of that is because people feel that politicians say one thing going into an election and they do something different on the other side. And I don't want us to be a government like that. We made commitments in our manifesto that we didn't want to increase taxes on working people, and so we made those commitments around national insurance, VAT and income tax, and we're going to stick to those. That's going to mean difficult decisions elsewhere, but I think it is so important to restore trust. There's been a rise of populist parties, not just in Britain, but around the world, and that is because trust in mainstream politics is on its knees. We need to turn that around. We've got that opportunity now in government to turn it around, but it does mean sticking to the promises that we make.
Well, talking about promises, in the run-up to this budget, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has suggested that the budget's going to be painful. So who is the budget going to be painful for?
Well, we've made those commitments around working people because under the Conservatives, it was working people who always bore the brunt of tax increases. And as a result, families, young people had less money in their pockets, and they were always the ones whose pockets and purses were raided to make the sums add up. And I'm not going to do that. That's why I've made those commitments around those key taxes that working people pay. It means we'll have to look elsewhere, but we'll set all that out in the budget. But this will be a budget about trying to protect the incomes of working people, a budget to start to fix the problems in our National Health Service. We won't be able to reform everything overnight, but we're going to get started, and then beginning to rebuild the economy and bring investment back to Britain, because there's difficult decisions about tax and spending, but those decisions are made even harder by the fact that our economy has barely grown the last 14 years. Growing the economy is absolutely fundamental, because if you can grow the economy, you can lift living standards. If you grow the economy, it means families and businesses are paying more tax, not because you've increased the tax rates, but because the economy is successful, and therefore you can have money to reinvest in our public services. So growth is the number one priority of this government, because growth has eluded us for too long. And the prize on offer from bringing stability back, reforming how our economy works, is getting that growth in the economy, which is what is necessary to fix the big challenges we face as a country.
So I understand the plan currently is, obviously this is going to be a particularly difficult budget, and it's a particularly difficult time for the country. And you've made clear that you're not going to be raising those taxes on working people, but you're also not going to be cutting them either. So what conditions actually need to be met in order for you to be able to cut taxes for working people and cut taxes for people?
No, that's a really good question. I would love to be able to deliver a budget where I could cut taxes on working people. We're not in that place at the moment. Because the public finances are not in a good place. But if we can grow the economy, if we can bring that investment and prosperity back to our country, then I hope that we can begin that journey of lowering taxes on working people. But what I don't want to do is what previous governments have done, which is make false promises, make promises that I don't know if I can keep. And I think that is what erodes trust more than anything. So I can't make commitments around cutting taxes in the future without saying where the money is going to come from. It's what I would like to do, but I can't make any promises when the public finances are in the mess that they're in today.
Just moving on slightly from that then, I just wanted to ask a very quick question about public sector pay. So your government has recently negotiated settlements with doctors, teachers and transport workers. And while all of these increases were above inflation, they've still left those workers on a lower real-term pay than in 2008. So how much of a priority is it for you and for your government to achieve pay restoration for those public sector workers?
Well, back in July, we gave the first meaningful real terms pay increase to public sector workers in 14 years. And I'm really pleased that we were able to do that, because it's not public sector workers who are responsible for the poor economic management the last 14 years. And it's not patients or parents with kids at school who are responsible for it as well. And we needed to bring to an end the industrial action, which has cost our public services and those that have used them, but also cost the public person an awful lot of money. We can't overnight undo all the damage that Conservatives have done, but in accepting those independent pay review body recommendations, we can begin to turn the tide and ensure that public sector workers are rewarded properly for the really important work that they do.
Okay, and just one very quick last question. Given that we've done this interview 2 years in a row, there's a chance we could be sat here again in 1 year's time. So what do you want to be able to say that you've achieved next year, in the next year?
If we meet again this time next year at our conference, I want to be able to show you, but show the people of our country, that we're beginning to take those first steps to improve the finances of ordinary working people, fix the NHS, and start bringing investment and growth back to our country. Those are three big things. We can't do it all at once, but beginning to make progress in each of those three areas is my priority for the year ahead.
Amazing. Well, we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for joining us again. Thank you.
Thank you.